Welcome everybody to our virtual webinar, Makerspace SEL Mashup, inspiring students to become makers. We're really excited to be here today. Me and my colleague are going to be doing some great things. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you again for joining us. So let's begin and get into our presentation today. So I like to have an agenda right away. First things first, what we're going to really dive into is a makerspace philosophy. We kind of have to level set on this, make sure everybody has the same mindset. So then when we talk about the mashup section of it, we kind of know exactly where we are with the makerspace. Same thing with social emotional learning. We're going to dive, not deep dive, but we'll kind of get into it a little bit.
Yeah,
there we go.
We're really in the shallow end is surface kind of stuff, but we're really going to brainstorm and actually, based on what you guys think, maybe make this into a series and then really do the deep dive.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. So get into the social emotional aspect, then we're going to mash it up, right? We're going to mash it all together, do some activities, do some prompts. I think you're going to get a lot of value from this and you're going to find this really exciting to be able to do. And then at the very end, of course, we'd love to wrap it up, do some Q&A, some interaction components too. So first things first, what is a makerspace? So if you look at the definition, I like this for several reasons. One of the first things, I'm going to read it real quick and then I'll kind of get into a little deep dive here. So the goal of a makerspace is to empower students to see themselves as inventors, builders, and creators. Makerspace allows learning new skills through trial and error, experience failure of an initial idea, the exploration of possible alternatives, and then problem solving to improve on the idea. So the reason why this is really good is because, for one, it doesn't talk about the exact space itself. It can be virtual, it can be in the classroom, it can be a gymnasium, it could be at home. It doesn't designate an exact place and time of where you can be. So that's one thing I really like about this. The other thing that I really like about this is it doesn't specify a specific subject. So just because you have a makerspace doesn't mean it has to be STEM or STEAM, or doesn't mean it has to be language arts or math or science or anything designated that. It really is about empowering the students to create these mindset of growth mindset to really empower them to have that critical thinking skills, being able to build, be those inventors, and be able to solve those problems and apply that to real world applications. So that's really why I like this definition and why I like to use it. But again, makerspace is kind of like this universal area where there's not one definition. And that's why I like the level set, just to make sure we're all kind of on the same page of why we or what we talk about when it comes to makerspace. The other aspect I like to talk about when it comes to a makerspace is talking about the engineer design process. So you might see something similar to that, like you see on the screen, but it could be anything, right? So you might have called the engineer design process the cycle. Maybe it's the being an engineer, and this is just the framework of what we use. But essentially, there's these different terminologies that you want students to get comfortable with to start thinking about, how do I solve a problem? So when they're at home, we just organically or naturally do something, we solve it. Like, for example, if we can't find something, we go through this process of, okay, where did I last see it? Where were common places that would be if it wasn't there? Can I remember? All those different cases that we just normally do. With students, sometimes they just struggle with that. And so we have to kind of teach that process. So that's why it's important to talk about this. The other aspect about talking about a makerspace is tying it to real world problems. Now, it wasn't necessarily in our definition per se, but this is a key component because we also have to teach about the why. Why are we doing this? How is this tied to real world? So whenever we're building or creating something, there's usually an intention for that, right? So whether that's a technology piece, whether that's something that we're using in everyday life, everything has come from something. And so tying it to real world problems really brings it home about the content that they're learning, making it authentic. And then the aspect that I like to focus on too is talking about the different strategies and including the failure aspect. When we fail is when we truly learn from from those different instances. I imagine Chris has had certain cases where she's like, you know what, that did not go as well as I thought it went.
Yes, in the world of art, very rarely what I see up here gets down here, and that's only because I don't have an art teacher on hand all the time, which is why we need art education. But through the process, and art uses the engineering and design process. So I love that. And so, yeah, but the failure is good. And I think sometimes in art, because you're making something, it doesn't feel as harsh. I mean, and some people do take it terribly, but but you know, when you start talking about solving real world problems, it feels maybe a little bit worse that you failed. We need to feel failure though, because failure is real life. And so it's a great lesson to teach.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. So moving on to the next phase, I wanted to also incorporate something called a rubric that you've probably seen. This is this one example of that. The reason why I was kind of attuned to this one is because, of course, you might have seen creativity before. That's obvious. You know, you want them to be creative, think outside the box, just to kind of stretch their mindset of what is the norm. And then you get into the iteration part. So the next steps and improvement parts, just through the failure that we just talked about, usually there's many iterations before we come to that final product. Then the initiative, right? We want to get students to have that resiliency. We want them to take that motivation to the next level to actually continue going. Just because you hit a roadblock doesn't mean you just stop, right? You want to keep that motivation going. The learning aspect, obviously tying it to the core standards and the competencies that you're going to be doing. And then the one component key that I really liked about this rubric is the community aspect. Not all the times do we think about the community outside of school. What we learn in school, what we teach our students, how they're going to be learning, how they're going to be applying those skills, also pertains to the outside of school element. So bringing that community aspect into there, I think is a really nice element that you can also tie into the social emotional learning aspect as well.
A couple of things on that, Jordan, is the first one is not everybody like grades on the Makerspace. Sometimes it is just an opportunity for students to get in there and learn and grow and, like you said, fail. But if you are making it like a course or making it part of your curriculum, this certainly is a great way to do that. The other thing too is the community part I love, because I see it happening in art education a lot. And when teachers get their students and their student art out into the community, or they do art with a purpose, it is amazing how that resonates with the community who pays taxes and, you know, supports the school. But it helps make sure that they see what's happening in the school, and it builds your program, and it does a lot of good for you, your students, the school, and the community. People like to see this stuff.
Absolutely. I think so. I totally agree 100%. And to Chris' point, absolutely, not everything has to be graded. Sometimes the pressure and the anxiety and the stress of feeling like, oh, this has to be graded, especially when it comes to art. Myself, my artwork, I would first say, you know, I'm not the best at art, but I'm going to give it a gosh darn good chance that, you know, that I'm going to try to do it well. I'm at my best efforts. And sometimes I surprise myself too, you know, in that element, right? And so it's always good to kind of have that back in the mindset. And we're going to talk about some of those different kind of triggers in coming up and talking about some prompts. But that's a great element there. So moving on to the SEL framework, I'm going to let Chris take over a little bit here and kind of give some background on this as well.
Yep. So CASEL is the collaborative for academic of social and emotional learning. They are the folks that have really come up with the 5 core competencies that is the framework for social and emotional learning. So self-awareness, you know, knowing who you are and how you are reacting to the world around you. Self-management, you know, being able to be in control of your emotions and knowing what you can control and can't control. And we have a little bit more on that later. Responsible decision-making. This is a life skill. And in school, whether it's a makerspace or art or science or math, it is making those decisions or at recess. So relationship skills is how you interact with other people and and building on those and what's appropriate and how to show respect. And then social awareness is being a good citizen, understanding community, understanding culture, and learning about others with respect. And so all of those compile our social and emotional being. And so schools are extremely excited to make sure that they are teaching kids with social emotional learning in mind, so that they are teaching the whole student, and so that they're building schools that, you know, have less behavioral issues, less drug and alcohol issues, less bullying, and just making good citizens. And I giggle when I say that, because in my world, that was what it was. It was citizenship, and you actually got a grade on citizenship when you were in elementary. I'm curious, do you still do that? I know most of you are elementary teachers, so type in, do you guys still give grades on citizenship, or is it called something different now? I'm probably dating myself, but that's what we called it. So that's the framework.
All right, great. And so when we start thinking about all the different framework and putting that in mind with the makerspace, it really comes down to it's really kind of open-ended at this point. Makerspaces, we kind of give that philosophy of what it means to be in a makerspace, but then tying in the SEL component is a really good opportunity to kind of put them together to make something very, very meaningful. And one of those ways to do that is through writing prompts. So writing prompt is one of those strategies of teaching students how to be able to solve problems, right? And so how do we solve problems? Through managing our own emotions, managing other different critical skills, to be able to interact with the others, you know, being able to become confident and become empathetic individuals. All those things can happen through writing prompts. And it kind of gives a good opportunity, just like we are as educators. We reflect on those lesson plans. Well, that didn't go well, right? And so we have to take those same kind of aspects of reflection, but also apply them to everyday life. And so this is where kind of writing prompts kind of comes into it to make a big impact for educators.
So funny that you say that, because, well, not funny that you say that, but talking about the reflecting, a few people have commented that, no, we don't grade on citizenship. It's now broken down into skills. And so you've probably touched on some of those skills, but somebody else did say they were graded on citizenship too. So thank you for not making me feel like I'm the only ancient one here. But it's now divided into different skills, or civics is also included into like social studies. So
yeah,
very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And social studies is another great area where you can talk about equity, social justice. There's a lot
absolutely.
of different topics.
And that's sort of, well, I'm jumping the gun.
No,
so,
that's okay.
No, you keep going.
Oh, all right. There's
Save
a
it,
lot
Chris.
happening. Absolutely. So the first thing we're going to talk about as far as writing prompts, we're going to focus on develop the critical skills for how they interact with others. Yeah. So we're going to kind of focus there, that aspect first.
A little bit of the social awareness.
Yep, exactly. So for one example that we have here is we're talking about role playing or imitating, you know, different kind of faces or guessing kind of the different emotions that you can kind of see. And one of the games that we come up with for this example is why that face, you know, right? And so if you're making a face and it's like, well, yeah, why, or you see why the face, you know what? There's a lot of different ways that students can start reading emotions, and it's really critical, especially at the early age. I now have a son aged 3 and a daughter that's going to be 1 year old soon. So I'm going through that same kind of emotional learning aspects with them and understanding a reflection of my son interacting with my young daughter, who's not even 1 yet. And so it's a great learning experience.
Oh, and you know what she's saying based on her
facial expression.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So they
or
can communicate.
In Zooms, like, you know, for teachers, you know, if you're lucky enough to get your students to keep their camera on, sometimes I'm sure littles can't, you know, hide what they're thinking. You'd be amazed, adults don't either. Some of those some of our Zooms.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
yes, exactly.
You know, if you're smart, you turn your camera off if you have a bad face. Otherwise, you got to practice your poker face.
Absolutely.
This one's a really good one.
Yeah, and it's a great opportunity for you to really engage with your students. This is great for early learners, elementary, even at the, like Chris was saying, even your coworkers. Sometimes we don't really can get a good read on somebody. It's because for some people, they don't actually express any of their emotions.
I totally crack up though, because I have worked with people like that, and I've interviewed with people like that. And you're like, I have no idea if they liked me or not. I have no good read on
Yeah.
if they are interested. Yeah, and that is hard. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
absolutely.
You appreciate those prompts, which is sometimes really hard for virtual stuff. Like I feel for all of you who've had to teach virtually, or like we get it because we've had to do a lot of our webinars without your faces on. And
Yep.
ouch, I
Yep.
like seeing faces.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the other aspect of this is managing their own emotions and behavior. So this is another aspect we're going to be focusing on as well when we're talking about some writing prompts. So
hold on that. So one example is of an activity is called the circle of control. And quite honestly, part of where I got it was from this book called Exactly You, The Shape of Your Feelings. The actual sort of lesson plan is to take a piece of paper and you sort of scribble on it, because that's a great way to show emotions. Maybe really hard marks are frustration and anger or whatever, or, you know, circly kind of things might be whimsical, that kind of stuff. So you just talk about emotions as they might show up in a line or a shape or whatever. And once it's all filled out, then you sort of cut a circle out and you talk about, this is what you can control and this is what you can't control. And so when you talk about, you know, on this slide, when you're talking about how you behave, you know, like, for example, can you control the weather?
Mhm.
Is it in your control or out of your control?
Yep.
And so you sort of have some prompts, and it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, it can even be just a circle, and a circle like this, one that says control, one that says out of control, and or even a whiteboard or something that says control and out of control. But the prompts then get them thinking. So for example, in the situation that we're at right now, like, can you control COVID?
Yeah, no, you can't to a certain extent, but we can get into the
But,
technicality of that.
right? We can wear
Yeah,
masks, we can
yes.
get vaccinated. So then it starts to get a little bit of interesting. And
Yeah.
so it just makes it a really good way of thinking about things you can control and you can't control. So that then when they feel out of control, it gives them some ownership of what they can control.
Yeah. And you're going to have some of that gray area too. And that's a good opportunity for you to have those discussions, just like
Yes.
COVID, right? Some students are going to say yes, some students are going to say no, why or why not. And then you can have those meaningful discussions beyond that
Yep.
as well. So just a great opportunity. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. The next aspect we're going to talk about is managing their emotions. And so we're going to talk about some different writing prompts that we can do for this. And one of the things that we talk about is triggers. And a trigger is something that creates an emotional response that's very intense, or it's maybe from a memory that creates these intense emotions, right? And so when we talk about triggers, you might see some familiar triggers here up here on the screen right here. You know, arriving somewhere late, that sometimes is a big trigger for somebody. They don't like to be late because they're kind of feeling out of place, right? Maybe it's, you know, a big project is due soon. I've been kind of, you know, procrastinating, and now all of a sudden this project is due. I'm starting to feel a lot of stress. Some kind of trigger is sometimes public speaking, public speaking in front of other people or their peers. That could be another trigger. This is a great way to have good conversations and then talk about also the coping strategies behind some of that. Maybe it's the deep breathing. Maybe it's talking to a friend. Maybe it's a way to just shout out loud because I'm so frustrated. There's a lot of different ways and different coping strategies that you can utilize to be able to help.
Halt. Have you ever heard of Halt? Halt
Yeah.
is hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And so when we're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, that often triggers us to, I mean, when you think of even like your children, obviously when they're hungry, what do? Well, you know, I'm hungry, right? If they're angry, yep, they're crying then too. Lonely probably doesn't happen with babies that often, but still it might happen with an adult where, you know, or tired, and sleep deprivation, definitely a trigger. So that's just an acronym, and I'm sure there's probably millions of others out there, but that's a great way to talk about. Sometimes it's something that is happening around you and that triggers you. And it might be one of those 4 things. So you always stop for a minute or halt and think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are great opportunities for you to actually start incorporating right even before you start getting into maybe these teamwork organizations. So like if you're going to be doing a group project, maybe we got to know about different triggers of our students, right? If they start to understand what's a trigger for one student, like I don't like it when, you know, I get stressed when I have to feel like I have to take on all the work, right? And there's that collaboration and the teamwork. So those are different things that we can use and strategize with our students to be able to help out with this. Because we, you know, we've all been in that situation before where we get into that setting where the class and those teachers in front of the class and says, all right, it's time to be in group projects. Immediately, some people are like, no, I do not want to do a group project. I'm done. I'm sick of this. You know, it's same thing in our workplace. There's certain group projects where like, no, I do not want to work in a team. This is just frustrating. Or even if being on like a Zoom meeting, right? And you're working in a group project, and it's like, this is not going well whatsoever, right? It's not easy. So there's those different things that we can use, and we can make that relationship and connection with our students and humanize it a little bit, especially when it comes to these areas. So as long as we know and understand where somebody's coming from, it makes it a little bit easier to be able to do some of this collaboration, especially when it comes to a makerspace.
It's a great way to learn.
Absolutely. All right. The last section that we're going to talk about is talking about developing that confident, productive, and empathetic individual. So this is the other last part of this framework that we really kind of want to focus on some different writing prompts. And then we're going to get into some different activities as well. So one of the things that we can talk about, and I like to say, and it's kind of one of those things that reflects back to that opportunity to connect those that maybe we've lost touch with, is writing personal notes to friends or family, especially when it's not expected. So sometimes with students, when you're first getting into this aspect, you got to think about, okay, well, what would I write to my friends? What would I write to my family? I don't know. So start taking notes, right? Start talking about, okay, what's the last thing you talked about? What are some things that you did the last time you saw them or you know, see them do? Maybe think of some different questions that you can ask. Well, you know, how was your day? Well, maybe getting a little bit deeper about, you know, instead of like, what was your favorite thing about today? You know, there's some common questions you get in the car with your family, your parents, and the first thing is like, well, how was your day? Well, the parents or the student's office is like, it was okay, it was fine. It's like one word's response. Well, let's get into a little bit deeper. What was your favorite thing today? Or what was the one thing that you learned that you were really excited about today? Right. And then so start getting into a little bit more of those meaningful conversations that can really kind of get them excited a little bit more beyond that one word response. You know, and then also anecdotes. Anecdotes are awesome, right? Like the funny, you know, stories or something that you can relate to that can really, you know what, you know, Aunt Jean, the last time I saw you, you had a really funny story about, you know, X, Y, and Z. And it really kind of makes them feel excited. It can be very basic. So I kind of get one little writing prop on there, you know, hey, get back here soon. I miss you. When I do get to see you, maybe we get to go to the creek or something. I think it'll still be hot. You know, let's talk on the phone. You know, it's just something very basic, something very easy, something that they can connect with. And that could be very basic. And you can get into a little bit more elaborate, maybe, because maybe you got some family friend that you haven't seen in a while that you just absolutely love and you want to connect with. You kind of really miss them. So just those little writing sections, it could be mail, it could be an IM message, text,
absolutely,
maybe a little TikTok video. That's something, a little media presentation,
fun. Yes.
Make it interactive. So there's a lot of ways you can kind of connect in this meaningful way.
Very good.
So, all right. Now we're kind of getting in the sharing phase. I know we've been talking a little bit here. We're going to get last little tidbits here. I want to kind of hear from you a little bit about some of the things that you've done in your makerspace or some things you connected to SEL, or maybe you want to comment on what we just shared today, maybe some different plans. feel free to raise your hand or take yourself on mute. Maybe you want to put it in chat, Q&A. We're going to be monitoring a little bit. While you're writing those things down, you're thinking about those different aspects. We're going to actually share some other different projects here. I know Chris has brought a lot of different ideas and things, and then we'll be able to read and see what you did as well.
Well, I think Makerspace is anything that you can make it. And they can't unmute because they have to be panelists to unmute. So they have so you have to use chat. In another time, another place, we'll make everybody panelists and then they can unmute and chat at the same time. But one of the suggestions, if you're doing a makerspace that's going to be an SEL makerspace, if you're going to mash it up or mosh it up, what about like a literacy space, where you're going to have like books and then a wide variety of different prompts. This book happens to, it's a little boy who lives next to a nursing home and he gets to become friends with this lady. She has dementia, and so he learns about memory and helps her with her memory. It's beautiful. I mentioned the book by Sarah Krajewski. This, by the way, is called Wilfred Gordon MacDonald Partridge, and it's written by Mem Fox. And so lots of books that might have some really good emotional kind of feelings, a lot that you could talk about like anti-racism. And that's a big, big topic. And you want to be able to do it in a safe space. And there's a lot of really great books. Speaking of that, lots of politics happening this year, lots of social justice things that are happening. What about a station on what is important to you and how do you show it in a respectful way? Maybe it's something like suicide prevention and you just want to put up signs around the school about let's talk, or you're not alone, or whatever. This be a good listener. This one was done by a kindergartner with a little help from a grown-up. And so the idea was the sort of monster was the teacher and everybody needed to be a good listener. So cute. And again, just again, maybe for suicide prevention on, you can do this, and just encouragement, or bullying. I mean, there's so many topics that talk about what's important to you. Recycling. I mean, it doesn't have to be emotional issues, but it might be on recycling or things like that. And we are just running out of time. So I think we're going to have a part 2.
Yes. So if you do like this series, first and foremost, I'd like to introduce ourselves. We'll like to do this at the very end. My name is Jordan Nelson. I'm the customer engagement manager with Nasco and our STEM Team Solutions. With me, I am
Chris Bakke, and I like the comment that says like making sea animals from recycling. So using recycling stuff is a fantastic idea. Doing an autobiography book for the whole 4th grade. Really cool. Those are cool projects.
Absolutely.
We would love to hear more. I am Chris Bakke. I'm the customer engagement manager for art. I always say put the A in Jordan's STEAM. And so
absolutely.
Together we are just excited and delighted that you do what you do. And we would love to hear more about what you want to hear from us on social emotional learning, maker spaces, or any other topics.
Absolutely. And so at the very end here afterwards, if you like to write some questions, feel free to do it. So now kind of reiterate a couple things. First things first, the survey afterwards, make sure to write down and document everything. That's where we kind of make sure to keep track of all the different information.
Matters.
Your voice does matter. And so that's where you can kind of give us your feedback and we can really hone in on a couple different areas. So maybe you like this component, maybe you do want a part 2 or list where we're going to list more activities and get more examples. We can certainly do so in that. Just give us that feedback in the survey. Also, in the end of this, we also are going to have a recording. So if you do want to rewatch this at any given time, this is being recorded, you'll be able to do that. And we will have a certificate participation as well. So at the very end, if you do want to reach out to us, go to engage@nascoeducation.com. that's going to be an easy way to be able to ask questions or do any kind of follow-up. Because sometimes when we're put on the spot, it's like, you know what, I can't think of anything right now, but afterwards it's like,
Yes.
you're laying down or you're in the shower doing other things. That's when we sometimes get our best
I know,
ideas,
right?
right?
Driving to work.
So feel free to write those down. And at that time, reach out to us at engage@nascoeducation.com.
Don't call while you're in the shower though.
Oh,
That'd be
bad idea. Bad idea, right? All right. Well, let's see real quick. Is there any other questions, anything in chat, Q&A that you can see?
Nope, nothing. Just super glad that you joined us today, and we hope that you do come back.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.